Welcome into Coach's Corner. Jordan Woodruff with you here today. And, we're getting into the sports year, getting a little closer. Practices are going. But we thought it'd be a good opportunity to let you know your athletic trainer, Kylee Jackson. Of course, athletic training is something that is big in my family because my wife is also an athletic trainer. And Kylee, appreciate having you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you along. I think first, one of the big misconceptions when you say athletic trainer to some people in public, like the school systems know what's going on, but you say that, they're like, oh, you're a personal trainer, right?
Yeah.
So tell people what an athletic trainer is and also how in Oklahoma you have to be certain qualifications to be one.
Okay. So an athletic trainer kind of covers a little bit of everything in terms of sports medicine. We're very well prepared for emergency situations. Outside of like an ER doctor or an EMT, we're really the medical professional with the most hands-on emergency experience. We do injury prevention, whether that be tape or stuff in the weight room. We take care of hydration at practices. We diagnose and treat injuries, including the rehab process. We're very involved in concussion care. Outside of neurologists, we're the foremost concussion experts in sports medicine. So we really are kind of a jack of all trades in terms of medicine. And in the state of Oklahoma, you have to go to an accredited college and get a degree in athletic training, and then from there you take a national certification exam, and then once you pass that you have to actually be licensed by the state, which means you have a physician that you're tied to that is technically your supervising physician. Some of them more hands-on. Dr. Holden's been great about kind of letting me do my own thing because he trusts me and my experience in education, but they're kind of tied to you and you technically work under them.
Yeah, so it's very interesting when you look at what you do as an athletic trainer. And what a lot of people don't understand is the days are long, right?
Days are very long.
Because for you also teach a class,
yes.
But then also you're staying for most of the day, and then all of a sudden you have practice, and then you're there before practice, taping ankles, doing treatments, and then after practice, if anything happens, you're there even longer. So a lot of times you beat the coaches in, and you're last one out.
Yep. I'm usually unlocking and locking up the facility, kind of in a normal non-game day. I get in about 7:30 because I have first hour weightlifting. So during that time, I'm doing treatments for anybody that has first hour weightlifting or just anybody who wants to come in before the school day starts. Then about 8:30, I leave to go teach. I teach second through fifth hour. Sixth hour is my plan period. I'm usually back in the training room to do 6th hour weightlifting treatments. And then 7th hour, I get about 30 minutes to do rehabs and taping and evals before I go out to practice. Practice will usually wrap up around 5 or so, depending on sport and day and schedules. And then on a game day, it's pretty much the same, except I go from practice to somebody's event. And depending on the event, I'm here until 10. Sometimes I'll be here until midnight or even later.
Wow. So, and then the athletic training profession is constantly changing. So, for instance, 30 years ago, concussions weren't as big of a deal.
Right.
Now they are. The hydration part of things has changed a lot. A lot of athletic trainers are looking more in the nutritional side of things as well. So talk about how the field has maybe adapted. And you're younger doing it, but you certainly are aware of the things that people that maybe mentored you were going through. So talk about how it's changed and how it's changing.
Right. So one really good example of this, because I am young, but when I was in college, the current concussion software that we use here at Ponca was actually just being developed, and I was part of the beta testing for that. And that was 8 years ago. So in 8 years, we went from really just having pen and paper tests, which made it really, really hard to baseline any of your athletes and kind of see what a norm is for them because it's super time consuming, to now we have an app that we use and we can get in a big group. It takes about 15 minutes and you can knock everybody out in a 15-minute session. And then also just when I was in school, the big focus on concussions is like, how do we get them back in sports? And then kind of now we're looking not just at how do we get them back at sports, how do we get them back into the classroom? Because research is starting to become more prevalent, showing that these cognitive issues that can come with concussions can, impact their learning abilities, their concentration in class. The lights and the noise of a school can really, really delay their healing process. And that's actually what I did like my master's thesis on was how concussions impact academic performance. And then just looking at, we use wet bulb temperatures now to measure heat instead of a heat index. We're much more mindful of teaching our coaches how to recognize signs of heat illness and how to treat that if there's, if I'm not there because I'm the only person in the district and I can't be at every sports practice at the same time. There's just too much going on. So then being able to kind of function independently. And then, we hear stories, 10, 15 years ago, a kid would get a concussion and they'd stick them in a dark closet by themselves. And now we're like, no, that's a really bad idea. We're even getting away from the idea of cognitive rest and saying like it's a really bad idea to isolate these kids. They should still be going to school if they can. We should still allow them, their phones or some kind of engagement that beforehand we would have said, oh no, that's bad because, that causes them to use their brain. So really just kind of every year, I'm required to do 50 hours of continuing education every 2 years. And every year there's just more and more about especially concussions, but heat illness and the best way to rehab injuries, the best way to prevent injuries. So it's constantly learning more, even though I'm not in school anymore.
Well, we're in the summer right now, and of course the heat is the big thing. Outdoor sports that start this time of year, and you could say even late in the spring as well, but this time of year, the softballs, for instance, football will be starting up. You have the heat just bearing down here in Oklahoma. 100-degree days are the typical. The wet bulb temperature, you talked about that, and pulling people off, and coaches trying to have practices around when you're not going to have the hottest times of day. But also, just the education part of things is so important too, and you're part of that with telling kids, hey, you need to hydrate. If you feel something, you need to say something. And, it used to be the days where a coach would say, hey, we're not going to give you water until you finish practice. Yeah. But those days are over, and a lot of that, I think, is because more schools are going to athletic trainers, which are educating coaches, players, and parents on what they need to do.
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately, a lot of these rules have had to be learned the hard way and have gotten implemented because kids either at your school or somebody else's school have been hospitalized or even died because people weren't being safe or mindful. We have a very, very strict regimented heat illness protocol. We use the wet bulb temp, and I've broken it down in a chart telling them, hey, if the readout is this, here's what you need to do. At this point, this is when we cancel everything and reschedule for a day when it's cooler. Here's where we have time limits and where we have to, push stuff maybe, like if you have a game scheduled at 5, or maybe now we play at 7. As well as, how often should your water breaks be? When should you have water breaks? Things like that. And then for football, I specifically handle water so that I can be sure that, we're staying on top of it, because football is a sport where you're most likely to get a heat illness because of the equipment that they have to wear for safety. So I'm always mindful. I bring out ice towels during practices pretty much until mid-October, just because you never know. And you can actually get a heat illness in the cold. So always trying to stay on top of it, make sure that nobody's going down on my watch.
Well, and not only that, the preparedness. So it's like at night, and I know because my wife's an athletic trainer, you go through all these different scenarios in your head. Most of those never happen. Right. But you're online looking at different scenarios that athletic trainers have shared, and you're putting yourself in those situations to be ready in case that does happen. So there's common stuff, the concussion, the knees, things like that. But, I mean, just recently we heard about the LeBron James' son, right? And what happened to him collapsing on the court. DeMar Hamlin with the Buffalo Bills was a great example where an athletic trainer saved his life that actually went to school at Oklahoma State University. So you're always prepared for those worst case scenarios, and I know that's something that can keep you up at night thinking, how am I going to handle this?
Yeah, definitely lost a lot of sleep just kind of thinking through things where, even minor things, like sometimes I'll go home at night and be like, did I make the right choice? Should I have done something different? Could I have prevented this? Could I have foreseen this in some way? But it's really my job to be like a defeatist and have that worst case scenario and always be prepared and plan for it. And odds are we're never going to need any of that work, but it's still work that I need to do, because if I don't, the worst case scenario is somebody dies. And I always want to make sure that that's in the back of my head so that I'm making choices to make sure that that does not happen.
Yeah, and when it comes to the health of the kids, that's the thing. And, a kid always wants to get back on the field.
Right.
A lot of parents want their kid to get back on the field. The coaches want the kid back on the field. And years ago, before the prevalence, I think, of athletic trainers, they were quick to rush them back in. But right now, we've seen that change. And that's been hard on coaches. It's been hard on some parents and some players. But we've seen that change, just saying, hey, we don't want to risk anything for your future health or maybe put your life in danger. So a lot of times athletic trainers, they have a big say on whether somebody gets back on the field, but ultimately it isn't anything about the kid more than just what's best for their health.
Right. It can definitely be hard because you are kind of the bad guy sometimes because the kid thinks they're fine. And I've had times when I've been like, what's more important, the rest of your life or this game? And they'll tell me this game. Because, they're 16 and this is the most important thing that they can think of. So I'm the one who has to kind of rein them in and be like, listen, you have a lot of life left. I have had multiple concussions and I definitely have felt the long-term effects personally. So being able to relate that to them and be like, here's what you're risking. Not even like the death part because none of them ever think that's going to happen to them. So just kind of the more minor things as well as ensuring that they know that I'm not doing this because like I don't like them or because I'm on like a power trip, but because I care about them and I want them to have a really long, really healthy life. I want them one day to be able to play with their kids and go to school and do whatever they want to do, and sometimes that means that I have to sit them at a football game.
Yeah. Well, and another thing, the athletic trainer, the relationship that you have with kids, it's different than that of a coach.
It definitely is, yeah.
And it's almost, I look at it from when I was in college and around an athletic training room, just seeing high school athletic training rooms. It's almost like this safe place.
Yes,
in a way, for these kids to come in. They get treatments, they get their ankles taped, whatever it might be. But they're free to talk about things and know, the frustrations with a coach, the frustrations with someone else, the frustrations at home. It becomes this kind of, in a way, a therapy type thing in that athletic training room, right?
It really is. If you ever want to know, like, what's going on in somebody's life, just hang out in the athletic training room because it is, like, the place all the school gossip gets spread. But I've always been really, really intentional in differentiating myself from my coaches, which is why all of my athletes call me by my first name, because I want them to have kind of a bit more of a personal relationship with me. But also they kind of naturally have that because, I'm not the one yelling at them when they mess up at practice. I'm not the one getting angry on the sidelines or anything like that. I am the one that's like, okay, I am worried about you. My job is not dependent on whether or not we win or lose games. And so because of that, that allows the kids to know that like I'm making decisions based on them personally and not really thinking about how that affects the team at large and ultimately how that would impact me personally.
All right. Well, got a couple of more things for you. I think first off, what is the most challenging part of your job?
The most challenging part is definitely having to sit kids down and tell them, they've had this season or even sometimes career-ending injuries. Because, like, not only because they are emotional, but especially if it's like a career ender, knowing that, like, they're done and they're done early because I am telling them it's not safe to go on. And it just feels like very much like I could have done something to prevent this, even if I couldn't have, or, even if it was like a freak thing. Having that kind of responsibility can be really, really hard.
And then what is the most rewarding?
Most rewarding is definitely just kind of forming these bonds and getting to know these kids. I mean, we have great kids here. They have these wonderful lives. They're wonderful people. So getting to play like this little part in their lives and like helping them kind of reach their goals and their success, whether that be through rehabbing an injury or just being there to cheer them on when they do well, is always been the best part.
One of the other things is you always want to challenge yourself. So what are some of the things that maybe you're doing different now to kind of challenge yourself and make things better?
Right. I'm always looking on how to improve. My thing is because we do get so busy at times, I have really been focusing on doing more thorough evals, even for stuff where I think like it's really, really simple. I need to ask them 3 questions and I know what's wrong with them. Making sure that I'm always spending a little bit extra time to rule out any of the kind of pink elephants where it's like, it's probably not this because this is really, really rare, but let's just double check. So that's something. And then I'm always looking for, how can we implement our concussion protocol better? How can we improve our heat protocol? How can we get coaches more involved in the emergency action plan process? Things like that.
Yeah, and speaking of emergency action, a lot of people don't know you're in charge of the lightning
Right.
stuff as well.
Yes.
Athletic
I do
trainers
lightning.
have to be meteorologists as
Right.
well because lightning strike within a certain distance, you have to shut it down for 30 minutes.
Right. Yeah, and that can be hard because, we have outdoor sports going on all over the place. Softball is off campus. So trying to make sure softball is shutting down while also taking care of the sports on campus, thinking about what's going on at the junior highs as well, can be really difficult, and trying to make sure that you're communicating quickly enough because you can jump from lightning's 10 miles out to lightning is half a mile out in like 30 seconds. So that's always really, really challenging as well.
All right. Now, I think the last thing that I will kind of have for you is what do you want maybe somebody watching this to know about you and your job as an athletic trainer? So we talked a little bit early, but kind of address what you would like someone out there to know that maybe isn't as familiar with what an athletic trainer does.
I think ultimately I want them to know that I am always keeping their child's best interest at the forefront, and that I am making decisions based on a very deep education and really, trying to ensure that I'm not holding kids back unnecessarily, but that I'm also keeping them from potentially harming themselves further, and that everything I do is researched backed, and I'm not making decisions just to make a decision.
All right. Well, Kylee, appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
No, we'll do it again, maybe
definitely.
sometime later. And I know this time of year is tough, especially with the heat. So
it is.
Best of luck.
Thank
and
you.
What you can do and keep all those kids safe. And I know you've already had some stuff here and there already, so you've got off to a fast start this year, right?
Interesting start of the year so far.
Yeah. All right. That is going to do it for today's Coach's Corner. Thanks to Chris for the filming and editing, as always. Thanks to Kylee Jackson, athletic trainer here at Ponca City. Jordan Woodruff saying so long, and until next time, go Cats.